Okay, so we're recording now, and welcome everybody. I'm Winston Welch. I'm Executive Director of the Outdoor Circle, and on behalf of the Lani Kailua Outdoor Circle, we are especially delighted to have Celeste Connors today from the Hawaii Green Growth. And I would just like to give a couple housekeeping things for Zoom. You probably are really familiar with it already, but in general, try to keep yourself muted so that you don't have the background noise of the dogs and the, and everything. If you're having trouble with your signal being glitchy, turn off your video signal. That tends to improve the broadband connection there. If you have questions, some people I see are putting them over in the chat. You can do that if you're familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry about it. We're going to have a question and answer period after Celeste finishes speaking, so you can hold those or put them off to the side. Other than that, you'll have to unmute yourself, remember, when you're asking a question when that time comes. And this is being recorded to the cloud. So with that, I will invite Pam to welcome Celeste today. So thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you very much, Winston. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Celeste. We're really glad to have you this morning. I'm not going to say very much because our time is clicking by. Enjoy. And we'll have questions in about 25 to 30 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Celeste, Executive Director of Hawaii Green Growth.
Mahalo, Winston, and mahalo, Pam. And good morning to all of you. It's just really a pleasure today to be with the Lani Kailua Outdoor Circle, to be able to share about what Hawaii Green Growth is doing, the Aloha Plus Challenge. And I think I'd like to also introduce Morgan Kelly on our team, who is an AmeriCorps Vista, who's going to be working some slides and sharing some slides with you today. But just briefly, before we get started, by way of background, some of you might know I'm from Kailua. Originally, I grew up in Monavie and spent about 20 years abroad overseas and in Washington, D.C. as a U.S. diplomat with the U.S. Foreign Service, and served in places like Berlin and Saudi Arabia and Greece, and ultimately spent 4 years at the White House as the Director for Environment and Climate Change. And during that time, had the opportunity to do things like work on the Paris Agreement negotiations, but also on Sustainable Development Goals and clean energy. And it was after that that I had an opportunity to return home with my family, to be with my family. I'm delighted my mother is joining us today, Betsy Connors. And I share that because, as I will share about what Hawaii Green Growth is doing as a network-based organization, just what the potential is of Hawaii to serve as a global model for other island economies and economies more broadly, emerging from the COVID recovery, looking at the pressing challenges of climate change and action that we can take collectively. Hawaii is a real model. And so having the opportunity to return home, to be able to work on this at a local global level is truly a blessing. And I would consider myself to be a child of LKOC, spending weekends with my mother in her service with all of you. And I think that definitely affected my career path and my choices, and then being able to come home and do that together. So needless to say, I'm delighted to be with all of you today, share the work that we're doing collectively, and look for opportunities to collaborate. So before I get going, I'm going to share a video with you. It's a brief video, and maybe Morgan can share a screen and share that tees up our conversation. I'm not sure we have sound, Morgan, so I'm not sure if you're able to find the sound on that.
Are you guys able to hear me right now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Give me 1 second.
And in fairness, Morgan added this video 15 minutes ago. So if it works, it works. Otherwise, we'll put it in the chat.
Ka moana nui akea, e ho pili mai ia kako. We say that moana nui akea, with the Pacific Ocean, is what connects us. The Pacific Ocean unites island people and has sustained our way of life for thousands of years. But today, millions of island people living across the Pacific are on the front lines of climate change, its effects destroying homes, infrastructure, and livelihoods. Islanders have become the world's first climate refugees, and we will not be the last. Recognizing Hawaii's unique position to address these risks, our coalition was founded, and together we have established public policy, an open data platform to monitor progress between government, business, and community, as well as projects that empower at-risk populations by bridging indigenous and modern innovation. Because of our achievements, Hawaii is recognized by the United Nations as one of the world's first sustainability hubs to meet the global goals. Hawaii's model is already being scaled through Hawaii Green Growth and the Global Island Partnership. With support, we can scale this model further to build resilience for underserved communities across the Pacific region, led by islands for islands, who can unite with the Pacific to face one of the most critical social justice challenges of the 21st century, and by telling our story, chart a sustainable course for the people of island Earth.
Okay, great. I found my mute button. So wonderful. Now, I've been advised to remind everybody to think about questions that you might have following our presentation, because we do hope to have a talk story session. So let's just jump right in. And for those of you who weren't able to join at the last discussion we had, I'm going to remind folks about what is Hawaii Green Growth. So we're a public-private partnership of over 150 individuals and institutions. And as a network, we are committed to advancing economic, social, and environmental goals to accelerate and scale Hawaii's local solutions. So this is a snapshot of some of our partners here. It is really a snapshot, as there are many more, but you can see here the diversity of partners that we think are needed to solve the challenges that we face with climate change, environmental stewardship, and economic growth. It's our state government employees, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and really, I'll come to that in a moment, how this key leadership helped kick everything off, the need to have private sector involvement as well. But a little bit about our origin story, that Hawaii Green Growth as a public-private partnership was actually launched on the margins of the US-hosted Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Meeting, or APEC Summit, in 2011. As some of you might recall, was convened here in Honolulu, where world leaders came together. And keep in mind, this is following the 2008 financial crisis, and leaders of the developed economies, France, Germany, the US, and others, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation leaders came together and said, we need a green growth recovery as we emerge from the 2008 financial crisis. And now, over a decade later, we find ourselves in a similar situation, a new challenge with COVID pandemic, which has really devastated our economies, deeply affected our communities, our ohanas, and we really need to be looking at how we can emerge from this crisis in a green, equitable, and resilient way more than ever. So Hawaii Green Growth in 2014 launched the Aloha Plus Challenge. Now, the wheel on the right represents the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Can I get a show of hands of how many people are familiar with the United Nations SDGs? Okay, I'll explain that in a bit, but in 2015, President Obama, along with other world leaders, agreed to 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be achieved by the year 2030. And there's a 15-year cycle. What predated this was something called the Millennium Development Goals, and these dictate development planning, decisions, and funding around the world. And there was a recognition in 2015 through 2030 that we needed to focus more on environmental stewardship, looking at climate change, in addition to reducing poverty, improving child and maternal health, education. And so these 17 goals are many, diverse, complicated, but necessary. And I like to call these a moonshot. Moonshot in the sense that we know we need to get there, but we don't yet know exactly how we're going to do it. And that's why we need these specific solutions to emerge that can be scaled. Now, these were agreed in 2015. To your left is the Aloha Plus Challenge. It's Hawaii's statewide sustainability framework that was agreed in 2014. And it was a statewide political commitment that the governor and the 4 county mayors and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs agreed to, in addition to the state legislature that signed a resolution, and as well as public and private and civil society partners. So truly a kako effort. And these are Hawaii's 6 goals in doubling local food production, natural resource management, green workforce and education, reducing waste, smart sustainable communities. And while we have 6, all of these 6, as you'll see, line up to these global goals and are really showing what Hawaii's contribution is to these global goals. So it's a local framework to achieve these economic, social, environmental goals. Now, I like to show this next slide of the UHupua because really, when we think about sustainability, it's not something that was conceived 20 years ago during the Earth Summit even, but really it goes back over 1,000 years to many communities and cultures. And this is Hawaii, the UHupua system, where communities were able to maintain a vibrant community livelihood, where you had water preservation, you had economic development and commerce in certain areas, and in this way really creating what is now being called a circular economy. So it's about systems thinking, and Hawaii has a long legacy of indigenous knowledge, systems thinking that is actually serving also as a model. So all of this work that LKOC and others have been doing for many, many years now, combined really got Hawaii on the map and recognized, because as a network-based organization, what Hawaii Green Growth seeks to do is uplift these bright spots. So this collective action resulted in global recognition 2 years ago as part of the Local 2030 initiative launched by the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations. Hawaii was recognized as a Local 2030 hub, tasked with scaling Hawaii's sustainability model in a locally and culturally appropriate way to other island economies. And really what this was is the United Nations recognizing that if there's any way for them to achieve these global goals, these 17 that I shared with you earlier, we have to go local, because the community is really where we see the most dynamic, innovative, and lasting solutions. And so what our organization is doing is bridging that local global to surface these solutions in a way that are globally relevant and quickly scalable. So in response to this request by the United Nations, Hawaii launched a Local 2030 Islands Network with other key island economies, including the Marshall Islands and FSM and Curacao and Bonaire and Guam, and even Ireland, which identifies itself as an island economy. And so in this way, we're showing that developed and developed island economies can come together because we share something unique. And the network now, the Local 2030 Islands Network, which Hawaii Green Growth serves as a co-secretariat to, is serving as a central resource for island-led solutions. Just this week, on Monday, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the East-West Center and the Hub, and the East-West Center will be providing space for this global secretariat to really increase our ability to scale. So we actually believe that this is a collective challenge that needs collective action. So we're committed to working with our neighbors locally, regionally, and internationally. So during the pandemic, we launched a virtual platform for islands, and we convened on topics of relevance to all of us, on tourism, sustainable and regenerative tourism, on island resilience and economic recovery, and food security, and data and innovation, and understanding where we need to have better broadband access and penetration for livelihoods. Now, just a few weeks ago, I don't know if some of you were watching the climate summit that took place that President Biden convened. And during this, the U.S. Special Envoy, Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, announced that the United States would be supporting the Local 2030 Islands Network based here in Hawaii during an event. And what this means is that the United States Department of State and NOAA, as well as USAID, the agencies will actually be supporting this through looking at integrating climate data and information, including with the Department of Energy on low emissions development strategies. And all of this will be providing technical assistance to support peer-to-peer learning and communities of practice on islands. So so a critical point of this is, how do we actually know we're making progress? And how do we hold ourselves accountable to the goals that we've put forward? So what Hawaii has done is we've developed a dashboard that has metrics and indicators to measure progress. And this open data dashboard provides transparency and accountability. For example, we're tracking things like INA-based education and affordable housing and green jobs. Now, these metrics were co-developed over 4 years, and now we have 6 years of data. And the dashboard is supported by the state and counties. It actually sits on the state.gov website and is largely funded by the Environmental Funders Group and other sponsors and network partners. So they say that you measure what matters. And so in order to determine the metrics and indicators, we went into the community to measure what matters. And now the dashboard, as you will be able to see, includes government data, environmental data, business data, and community data. Because actually, I'll get to this later, but our businesses want to be tracked on the dashboard. And so as a network organization, we convene over 50 meetings a year, and we continue to engage our partners and track progress to mobilize action. I think so going back to the normal, as we talked about, is not an option, and we continue to face these unique challenges. Now, how do we work? I think this is important for our partners to know. So to make progress, we convene different working groups and share priority initiatives, each of which meet quarterly. So for example, we have a policy and legislation working group, and this is a forum that allows our network members to collaborate and coordinate on key legislation that contributes to achieving our goals, our statewide goals. And so this group is also, we spearheaded a green recovery and job survey following COVID, which actually supports state and funding jobs that are now contributing to a green growth recovery from the pandemic. We also have our measures and our data working group for those that are data geeks, as we self-described. And in this way, we're always looking for the best available data and indicators and looking for where there are gaps. And just 2 weeks ago, this group agreed on 4 new metrics that are going to be tracked. There are other issues, social issues that we'll be tracking more, also food security. And Wahikapuna, where are some of the sites that we want to preserve? We also have the local Global Next Generation Working Group, which is working with statewide partners on the next generation of leaders on sustainability. And through this, we're going to be developing a youth advisory council that is going to be advising us on youth priorities to achieve our goals. And so, as you might have experienced too, I think our younger generation so much understand the need to preserve important nature for future generations. And so creating a platform for their voice to come forward is critically important. Now, what did we do as an organization last year? We pulled all of this content together and we launched Hawaii's first statewide review of the Aloha Plus Challenge, which provides 2020 benchmark data to inform decision-making, including on Hawaii's economic recovery. And this was also serving as something called the Local Voluntary Review, or the Voluntary Local Review, that is globally recognized as a way to show our progress against the global goals. And actually what's happened is, in a lot of cases, while these reviews of the Sustainable Development Goals are at the national level, many cities have actually taken it upon themselves to do their own reviews. So you now see voluntary local reviews from New York, Los Angeles, Bristol, Helsinki. Now, Hawaii, we produced the first statewide review because it was very inclusive. It wasn't just limited to the mayors. It included state data, civil society sectors, businesses, business data. And all of these metrics were co-developed by partners. So we had this short-term consensus building around long-term goals, which allowed us to track our progress. And after we show the slides, we're going to put these things into the chat so you can review it more thoroughly. But I'll just give you an indication. What is the data telling us? It tells us where we're doing well and honestly where we need improvement. If I were to take one goal, natural resource management, we might not always think this, but according to the data, on watershed protection, we're near the target. And the target is for 30% watershed forest management by 2030. This is about 253,000 acres. And so Hawaii is just over halfway to the target of 17.4% of watershed forests under high level protection. Again, while it might not always seem the case, we are on track for invasive species control with 50% of the Hawaii Interagency Biosecurity Plan recommendations being initiated. We have a long way to go. Where we really need improvement is on freshwater security. So since 2016, we've made some progress towards the freshwater target to increase approximately 11 million gallons per day in freshwater capacity relative to a baseline. And we need to increase this by 2030. And we also need improvement on native plants, plants that are listed, as you know, as threatened or endangered. And we're at 18 times higher than the national average of having these threatened and endangered species and plants in the country. So this is really an area of improvement. So I encourage you to go into this report, explore the data. We also include bright spots. What we mean by bright spots are where is the community doing well? And we're really pleased to include a project on Windward side. And this is the food to waste program. So this program by the Windward Hui, a hui of schools on the Windward side that you might be aware of, the Windward Zero Waste School Hui, they were able to reduce their trash by over 90%. And they engaged their students daily in diverting food waste from school lunches. So the kids would have their lunches, a little golf cart would come in with the barrels, they would actually take turns separating the waste, they would go out and compost that and actually sell that. So this project actually earned them 2 national awards from the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And they also recovered over 170 tons from the waste stream since 2014. And they've actually generated over $36,000 from community sales of the compost. So this is a great pilot. And we actually worked with them to develop an app that the students could actually track their data through the app, and that could be captured on our dashboard. And that's really important because it allows the students to really feel like they're playing a really direct role in moving our state forward on achieving these goals and feeling connected. And meanwhile, we can uplift the work that they're doing. I'm going to show you one more brief video. I'm going to kind of break up my remarks. This is a short one. This is about the voluntary local review, the report I just shared with you. So again, that shows a little bit about the voluntary local review, the 2020 baseline report. And in it, you'll find other examples of ways that we're working with our network. One of these is the Aloha Watershed collaboration. Winston, I know you're part of this, and this is a network of government, business, and community partners committed to a more resilient and prosperous Aloha watershed. It's actually really one of our only place-based initiatives, and the reason why we're focused on the Aloha because it is actually critical to our economy. It's very polluted. I personally, as a as a student, would kayak and paddle at times in the Aloha, and I'm personally committed to seeing that change. It's an environmental hazard, it's a social challenge. So the original vision of the collaboration was to establish a more expansive community engagement on disaster mitigation. And this was partly inspired by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers convening in 2015 on flood risks, and we're aware that there's a very large Army Corps project that's been proposed. And we realized the full extent of the potential devastation to our home and needed to gather stakeholders around this. So it started with 11 partners in 2015, and the collaboration now includes 60 members, and we maintain 2 central focuses at present. So again, this is not focused on the Army Corps project, just to be clear. It's a much broader mandate of a more prosperous future for the Aloha. And the first focus is really a feasibility study. With the Department of Interior, we are now working on an 18-month ridge to reef assessment that is stakeholder driven. We're actually utilizing extensive technical abilities. We've partnered with Stantec, which is a global design and engineering firm, to do a holistic watershed management plan, because we realize there are really lots of different projects that are taking place in the Aloha that collectively together, if coordinated, can actually increase efficiency and actually potentially generate new ways of getting revenue to support this work. The other component that we're working on is something called a community investment vehicle, or a CIVIC. And this is actually to really help create that coordination and that community input into a process of what we actually want and envision our future, and to facilitate cross-sectoral decision-making on projects early and often. We feel strongly that the community is often left out of really critical conversations, and sometimes it seems like an afterthought, which we really need to shift that. That community is driving these discussions in a way that is appropriate to their place. And I think this is something that LKOC does really well. And we have a lot to learn from you on that. So one area that I'll also highlight that we did recently is last year, as we were all kind of reeling from COVID, our partners approached us and said, look, we're really worried that when federal money does start to flow, it's going to leave out partners that have actually been working away on conservation for many, many years and might be directed to the bright, shiny object. And we have needs, and we need to get folks back to work and focus on these conservation issues and not lose sight of that as well. So we thought about it, and then we decided, we could do a survey. So we actually convened and coordinated with several of our groups that I mentioned, and we actually launched a COVID recovery survey to support Hawaii's economic recovery. And we really wanted to identify the green growth jobs that are available right now. Like, should you have additional capital? So this could include the farm to school program that currently employed 2 people but had capacity to increase to employ 10 people. That would allow them to be more effective. So we identified those green job opportunities, which included in the areas of food security and clean energy and ecosystem health and community well-being and the arts and creative industries. So looking at diversifying our economy. So we actually identified over 230 green growth projects, including 150 education and training programs. So this survey totaled an estimated 9,300 jobs that we identified with the names of the people and their emails and contact information across diverse sectors, and the total price tag was $585 million. And we were able to present this to the state legislature to say, when the CARES funding comes or when federal money starts flowing to support this, we can point you to the people and the jobs, and this is what it would cost to increase employment, close to 10,000 jobs. So now, based on this survey, and we felt that that's a way we could contribute, based on this survey, the Aloha Connects Innovation Program, which was led by OEDB, the Oahu Economic Development Board, and Sultan Ventures, they actually created a program, ACI, which actually was really carefully working to build long-term resilience, creating new jobs, getting people back into work, hiring nearly 1,000 participants, combined with over 300 local organizations and companies within 3 months. And I can tell you, because we served as a hub for this, people on our team really getting people into the system, into Altres, getting them employed, getting their healthcare and their insurance. It was a big lift because we only had 3 months to spend down this money. But now we're excited because we understand that this program will continue and there could be long-term employment for people in these areas in the future. And as a result of this, I would say that Hawaii is the first state that we know of to directly connect the CARES Recovery Act and economic recovery funding to actually sustainable development goals and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we're creating a really strong example nationwide. I'm going to just quickly go through these next ones because I do want to leave time for questions, but I also really want to point to the importance of the business community. And actually, we convene a group of 26 CEOs locally called the Sustainability Business Forum. And they're really taking the initiative to support sustainability in Hawaii. They've actually signed on to the Aloha Plus Challenge goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're increasingly leading on environment, social governance, or ESG metrics that companies are increasingly being required to report on. And this group is now connected to a group called the Global Compact, which is a group of 10,000 CEOs globally that have also signed on to these goals. So in that way, we're connecting our CEOs to global efforts and leadership to increase ambition. And we're seeing that institutional investors like BlackRock, for example, that have $8 trillion under active management, one of the largest institutional investors globally, have really made it clear, we're not going to invest in your company unless you're getting on a pathway towards a net zero emissions or you're looking at climate resilience. And they're demanding to see the climate action plans that companies have developed. And they don't just want to see the reports. They want to be able to connect the reports that the companies are doing to actual tangible actions on the ground. And so we think that our companies in Hawaii, particularly during COVID, responded by doing things like purchasing local food, purchasing from local establishments that were actually purchasing local foods, strengthening these localized supply chains, contributing where they can, and making a commitment themselves to reduce their carbon footprint. They're also working with the Nature Conservancy, for example, and supporting one of the first carbon offset pilots in Hawaii. So in that way, really, the relationship with the business sector is key, both for them to achieve their goals and honestly for us to achieve our statewide goals. So the last thing I'd say is kind of what's next. We have here a picture. These are further, in addition to having the statewide dashboard, we have further localized the dashboards to the county level, which I think is very remarkable because really with these high-level goals and sometimes the deadline of 2030, the 2030, by the way, is informed by science. It's actually the Intergovernmental Report on Climate Change, the IPCC report, and the scientists that draft that report have said that we have a decade to actually shift our behavior drastically across every sector of society to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. That's what makes these goals important and relevant. So this comes down to behavior change and individual behavior change. So to further connect this global effort to the individual and the family, we've developed these localized dashboards. So today, when we hop off this conversation, you can go on to the Oahu Aloha Plus Challenge dashboard, and I'd like to give Kauai credit for really pioneering this, where you can actually go online and make a commitment to reduce your carbon footprint, to increase your efficiency, water use, as well as to purchase local. And in this way, our team is working to refine this and to collect the data. We have a fantastic team. Kaimana Bingham is our dashboard manager. She resides in Maui, and her team, they're always looking for new ways to innovate on the data. So that's one way that I encourage you to get involved. I'd also note that this is our 10-year anniversary. So this year, Hawaii Green Growth will be 10 years old. Senator Schatz, then Lieutenant Governor, was very critical in helping to launch the Hawaii Green Growth platform and has been also very engaged in this. So we are going to continue to look at ways of meeting our goals. Every year, we have an annual network meeting where we set our strategic priorities as a network. And last year we convened and we have a 3-year strategic plan, which we'd be happy to share, which really shows areas that we need to make improvement on, and we're tracking progress against that. So we call it our SAIL plan. This October, we'll revisit the SAIL plan, we'll convene our annual network meeting to look at the gaps, where we've improved over the year. And we actually plan next year in 2022 to release a midterm review of the Aloha Plus Challenge, because it will be the midterm point from when it was launched in 2014 to 2030. And we're going to use the stakeholder input from our community meeting in October to inform that report. And so together, in partnership with LKOC and all of you, I think we're in a position to adjust to the needs of our collective stakeholders. We would love to hear your stories, how we can uplift them, figure out areas that we can collaborate to unstick things that are stuck. But I'll just leave by this one quote, I think, that the Prime Minister of Samoa said at a speech at the United Nations, which I thought was very relevant. He said, we are also arguing for the safety of the people of the world, and the rest of the world would be well served to listen. And as President of Palau, Tommy Remengesau, once said it to the United Nations, we are all islanders on island Earth. And so sometimes when we think about those images of Earth in space, really we're an island floating in space. And we think that folks that live on islands, that understand watersheds, ridge to reef approaches, are very well placed to help share and inform the rest of the world about what sustainability models should look like. So why don't I stop there? It was a pleasure to share that. It was a big data dump, as I would say. Morgan will populate some of the links in the chat. And I could hand this back over to you, Pam, or Winston, for any questions that came into the chat, which I can check right now as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Celeste. Very informative. Anybody have questions?
Thanks so much, Celeste. I thought that was such a terrific overview, and you know, it's important to hear these things again and again, because it takes time for it to sink in. Even though these concepts may be familiar to us on some levels, the work you're doing is so critically important for our state and our world. And I didn't realize that the co-directorate now, or the secretariat, will be housed at the East-West Center. So that's very exciting news, and I'd love to hear how Outdoor Circle can get involved, whether it's on our branch level or on our overall level. And those are discussions, you know, we can have later. But the image of the Earth floating in space as an island is a really interesting and powerful one. And I've heard that when that image came out, that it changed how humanity thought of itself, floating in space like that. So it's interesting that you bring that up in sort of a new context of what you're doing now. So I've just been really encouraged, and we're so fortunate to have someone of your caliber and experience and knowledge just at the helm of this incredible organization. So thank you for all that you do for our state, and how you gave us so much information to unpack here. We're just excited to see how we can engage on a personal and organizational level.
Winston, I just might make a two-finger comment on that. What you describe is really what certain folks have called the overview effect, right? It describes when astronauts, I think Buzz Aldrin wrote about this, the actual experience the astronauts experience when they see Earth for the first time in space. And it's one of both feeling, Aldrin described feeling deeply connected, but at the same time saddened by just the vulnerability and how precious Earth is. And I sometimes equate that to our work in Hawaii, because if you look at LKOC, for example, and all the great work that you've done over the many years, and in Hawaii, we often get so frustrated with what's not working, right? The conversations that aren't happening, the misses, the feeling like we could do better, and we absolutely can. But relative to other communities, and just based on my global experience, and that's kind of like that overview effect, we actually have a lot to share, and we are doing well, especially in the people part of things. And that's important to keep in mind, and sometimes we need outside folks to tell us that, like the Brookings Institution, right, or even the United Nations. was coming in to say, wow, Hawaii is doing, it can be a model. And that's the way we need to keep sharing with folks, that it's important that we do that. I was on a call, I've just been invited to join a national council of leaders focused on sustainable development goals for the United States. Just so you're aware, the United States is currently the only country in the world, the only member state of the United Nations that has not reported on their commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals that President Obama agreed to in 2015. And meanwhile, the rest of the world is really actively, Germany and others are actively working to achieve these goals. And having been in government during that time, it's how do we get the United States not only to start reporting on these goals, but to lead the world in these goals. And some of the solutions that these other colleagues of mine were saying is like, oh, we need to have stakeholder engagement. We need to have, a diversity of partners around the table. We need to have local state government. We need to have indigenous knowledge and voices come through. And essentially when I heard them, they were describing everything that I observe Hawaii is doing. So, and then they actually said we could do that. So, but at the same time, we need to learn from other places, absolutely, and have that peer-to-peer learning. So I just wanted the overview effect. So let's see, I see in the chat too, okay, there are a couple areas, I'm going to actually ask Morgan to put into the chat our waste diversion program. I would say, unfortunately, that is not an area that I think we're doing particularly well in Hawaii. But if I were to pull just some, if there are areas that we are theoretically more on track for, we had maybe 50% last year of solid waste was being diverted from landfills, not including waste to energy. And as of 2018, I think we're 70% towards what we have listed as our 2030 goal. But solid waste generation needs more improvement. So this is an area where we set the goal and it's underperforming. I think on the reuse as well, there's kind of an upward trend. And part of the struggle of measuring these things is not having comprehensive and consistent data. But in this case, as I recall, I think, and to be clear, waste is something that's managed very differently across each county. And so it's a very county level engagement that we have, but approximately 600 tons, I believe, of construction and demolition materials were diverted annually from reuse on Oahu, which is important. And source reduction definitely needs improvement. And so basically we're looking, and this again has certain difficulties with quantifying waste prevention or imports, and different metrics need to be developed for that. So we have a couple of bright spots that we do have in our report. Zero Waste Hawaii is doing quite a bit, Reuse Hawaii, and the Hawaii Environmental Cleanup Coalition. So we can point you to some of these resources. But I think a lot of the efforts might have stalled during COVID, certainly as we've had to adjust, and there's been a delay in some of the plastic use because people are balancing health, other areas that might have suffered our shared economy and space. And but some of the interesting things that we're observing, if I can share with our business forum, is there's a whole discussion about the future of work now. Right? Do we all need to be hopping in our cars and emitting, carbon emissions and getting to our office space and have them highly air conditioning? And then how is that affecting our families, our jobs? So what we witnessed during COVID, right? And we all enjoyed this, where empty streets, more flexible work, and a lot of businesses are saying we don't have to go back to that. What does the future of work look like that adjusts to our employees' needs as well as the environment? And further, what's interesting is at the same time that we have these climate environmental goals, we have a housing crisis. So there's some interesting discussion going on about how can you convert used building space to make that into affordable housing. These are discussions and actions that are actually taking place in other communities around the world. And actually this building space is in areas that would actually be more suitable for communities in some cases that have better accessibility. So those are some things that people are exploring. Also, it reduces overhead for businesses that now are left with a lot of empty building space. So this requires public-private collaboration because in order to do this, you would need to look at zoning and different regulations. So right away, you can see how you need the community to be involved. You also need city and state government and you need the businesses. So these are some of the areas of innovation that we're looking at. I'm happy to continue to take questions, or I can look in the chat.
I'm just wondering, Celeste, Windward Oahu, if we just single us out as Windward Oahu and Kawainui Marsh and all of that we have going on, how does that contribute to what our goals are?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Pam. I think, when I think about Windward Oahu, I do think about a lot of the examples that have been piloted that have worked well. And then some of the ongoing discussions about development in that space and community engagement. And, actually before answering that, I'd almost like to hear if you or somebody could summarize what the top 3 priorities of LKOC would be for this year, if that's stated, because that's something that we were talking about as our team going into this conversation. I would have reflected on that a bit further in advance, but there are a lot of projects that are underway that could actually use increased community engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly.
I don't know in terms of priority, but I think that one of the big concerns in this community is tourism, which seems in a lot of ways to be overrunning our communities, except that we also need tourism, and how do we balance that? I'm not sure on a state level they're really hearing those concerns. Another one, of course, is Kawainui Marsh, where there's a lot of energy afoot to put buildings over there, and some of it is good because it involves the Hawaiian community and how they want to have sustainability. And then the third one, I suppose, but as part of tourism, would be traffic. But sometimes on a Friday afternoon in Kailua, it's pretty hard to move around. And you grew up here. It used to be a little beach community. We all long for that. We realize it's never going to be that again, but there's a balance.
Yeah, absolutely, Pam. And as I grew up 2 blocks away from the trailhead of Monavie Falls. Mm-hmm. And, as kids, we actually, with my father, had participated in the Sierra Club project we did the trailblazing of that particular trail, which started from the pulley or the hairpin turn. So on the weekends, we'd pack up our sandwiches and go with pickaxes and literally build these trails and these access points. But there's no maintenance, so I think there are a couple challenges here. And so I'll break it down. We need more money to support conservation, hands down. And so I personally take increase the pie approach rather than squabbling for the crumbs approach. And so what we in Hawaii Green Growth are constantly doing is trying to increase the pie. And part of the local global framework that we've set up is to do exactly that. With the announcement of Secretary Kerry announcing U.S. support for the local 2030 Islands Network is all about funding and getting more funding to Hawaii. And so that can come in different forms. So first of all, we need more government funding. We need federal funding to support the programs and additional stewardship and to make sure that goes in the right direction. But we also need more private sector funding. And actually, if we think about Kawainui, if we think about Hawaii, some of the things that we're trying to do is make these into actual investment opportunities in a positive way. Because this is where, if I were to take a big step back from it, the benefit we have in some of these is taking a watershed-wide approach. because when you do ridge to reef, you have the opportunity to look at increasing efficiency throughout the entire watershed and even generating new forms of revenue, like stormwater capture and reuse, right? Even looking at stormwater fees, which can sound controversial, but are actually, if place-based, could be quite interesting in ways for getting people. I personally, if I knew that I was adding a couple cents a month to my bill because it was going to help steward that space with better management, tree restoration, impervious pavement. These are things that, managing impervious pavement, these are things that I would personally, so that's something that the city and county have been considering, by the way, as a stormwater fee and looking to pilot that. It's difficult when we think about the financial challenges that many in our community face. But we need to look for new ways of generating revenue. And if we are able to package these as investment opportunities that do that, we will attract private capital, but it would have to be in a way that's community determined. And I personally I'm not concerned about the private sector capital if it's, as I said, a community driven process. So that's sort of what we're looking at in the Aloha. Now, to touch on tourism, absolutely. And this is an area that has been raised by our other island partners. So what we saw during COVID is massive disruption to our economy, right? So also, if I think about climate change is inherently about disruption. Climate change is about a climate disrupted world that we're careening towards if we don't massively change our behavior within the next 10 years. Heat waves, sea level rise, increase of severe weather events, right? It would make COVID look like just a blip on the radar. And I do appreciate in Hawaii, we've not taken our eye off climate change. But so when you think about COVID, it's about disruption. It disrupted our supply chains, it disrupted our economies because tourism stopped, right? And we just saw that ripple effect across the entire community. Now it's emerging again. I'd like to think that we have a window to think about more regenerative and sustainable tourism. Now, one immediate thing I would recommend is for all of our members to go onto the DMAPs. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this process that HTA is leading. So what they're doing is they're actively trying to get input from the community to sort of self-determine how they want to see their tourism going forward. So John DeFries, who's the CEO of HTA, has been a longtime HGG partner and supporter, really sees the challenges first and foremost. His deputy, Kalani Kana'a, who some of you might know, is actually a Kailua boy, fourth generation, paddles for, I think, Lani Kai, or maybe it's Kailua. Let's just say Kailua, Lani Kai, Windward is definitely on their radar. But the DMAPs, I think, did Morgan put it into the chat?
Yes, it should be that link.
It's in the chat, but what we could try to find is the actual, and maybe in there, that's the news, but I think you can actually go into a link and provide input into that process. So they already ran the process in Kauai and Maui, and I think on Hawaii Island, and now it's Oahu. So really let's contribute, because this is going to be like the strategic plan. And by the way, prior to COVID, HTA already recognized that we were on an unsustainable pathway on tourism.
Wow.
And they actually adopted the Aloha Plus framework into their 5-year strategic plan.
Wow.
Yeah, so from a policy perspective, they were there. COVID really disrupted their ability to start focusing on that. But I can really tell you there's a high level commitment to address the stewardship and the community driven component of that. And Nainoa Thompson once made the comment that we should see the tourists as the students. And when they come, to see how we can educate them in ways of malama and kuleana and even ohana and aloha. So when they go back to their place, they can malama their place, which would be for the global benefit. Mm-hmm. And ultimately for Hawaii, that's most vulnerable to climate change and other island economies. And it's hard to do that when we feel inundated and overwhelmed sometimes, but I think I would say COVID presents an opportunity. I hope we don't squander it.
Yeah, that's good. I'm really encouraged to know that HTA was on that path prior to the pandemic, because sitting here in Windward, Oahu, we have no idea. We just feel like they're fighting to get more money for the state economy, but it needs more diversity.
Yeah, I think the leadership is 100% committed to making stewardship and our natural resources our greatest asset and our community. And knowing that in order to do that, we need to rethink drastically, and not just sustainable tourism, but regenerative tourism. Yeah, I know we're almost at time, and I see some, and Deborah, you've put something in there. I would very much like to explore ways that we can work together going forward and getting, I think for us at the very top level, we'd love to hear your stories. I just know firsthand that the work you're doing is remarkable and so important, and not always uplifted the way it could be. And so we would like to think about how we could even spotlight, as we say, LKOC on our platform to give it additional visibility and to really encourage others to take similar action. I think we've put in a few things that you could do directly and individually. We know Winston is participating in the Aloha Watershed collaboration, but we would welcome other participation in our working groups that I shared with you. Winston, I think you also participate in policy and ledge, and also our Windward, LKOC specifically. And now that we're all virtual, hopefully that facilitates more interaction.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any more questions? No?
I'm thinking there's a lot of questions and people's minds are just starting to percolate with them now. And as we finish,
Yeah.
oh, I wanted to ask this or that or the other. Is there a way that we can get questions to you for follow-up if we have some? And what is the best way to get in contact with you or folks on your staff?
Yeah, well, Morgan, if you could put in, Morgan can put in the best email. It could either be me or Morgan, our HCG connection. I consider myself to be part of the LKOC Ohana, so I know that there are ways of getting questions and information to me. And but I would like to challenge you to now, with the benefit of kind of understanding some of the new data, the new information that we're seeing, read the report. If something really irks you or inspires you to say, we have better data on this. We're always looking for ways to improve our dashboard. We're working really hard to invest in that. And we're hopefully, as part of our partnership with the East-West Center and UH, to set up a dashboard lab, because we want to be investing in future generations of students that can actually be coders and actually do the dashboard work here from home. I should have noted, in addition to the MOU with the East-West Center, we have an MOU with the University of Hawaii and Kamehameha Schools, with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, PVS, as you know, and the Global Island Partnership. And so these are key strategic partners for us. So absolutely, read the report, look at the dashboard. We're open to any suggestions and also opportunities that you see.
Thank you. So I think we'll wrap it up at that. Thank you very much, Celeste. Morgan, thank you. And everybody who participated, thank you for coming and sharing this with us. And we have so much work to do, so many conversations to have.
Thank you so much for having us. And it's your work that continues to inspire us. So thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Celeste.
Aloha.
Aloha.